Before we dive into this thrilling story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest uploads. Your support keeps us going. Now, let's get into it. They say betrayal doesn't always come with a knife in the back. Sometimes, it comes in silence. In an empty chair. In a missing name. Or, in my case, in 36 minutes of curated family footage, where I simply did not exist. I sat in the third row of the grand ballroom, my hands clasped neatly on my lap, my back straight like I was still begging for approval I no longer needed. The screen flickered to life. Laughter. Birthdays. Summer vacations. Matching dresses. Childhood memories. Faces I knew by heart. My father younger, laughing. My mother, long gone but radiant. And then, Selena, the stepmother who had rewired the family's DNA with one marriage and a velvet noose. And Lilith, the golden child. Always Lilith. But not me. Not once. Not a single photo. Not a fleeting frame. Not a mention. It wasn't that they forgot to include me. They deleted me. I didn't blink. I didn't speak. I just sat there, swallowing the acid rising in my throat, as the people I shared blood with smiled at the past like I had never been in it. I remembered being in those memories. I remembered who took the photos. I remembered the scratch on my knee from that trip to Lakewood, the one where Lilith cried because I won the canoe race. I remembered the Christmas Eve where I stayed up all night stringing lights across the porch because my father had promised. This year, we'll all be together. But in their version of the past, that night never happened. I never strung the lights. I never existed. Selena's voice rang out at the end of the video, smooth and saccharine as always. To family, she said, raising her glass, and the crowd erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. Music swelled. My name, my face, my presence, erased. That's when it hit me. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't an oversight. This was a message. We've erased you. Now kindly disappear. But here's the thing about people who've been erased for too long, they learn how to write themselves back in, with ink that burns. That was the moment I stopped playing the role they cast for me. I wasn't the quiet one anymore. I wasn't the obedient daughter, the ghost of the first wife's legacy. I wasn't Lilith's shadow, or Selena's inconvenience, or my father's moral compromise. I was the story they thought they buried. And I was ready to dig. The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the ballroom wasn't the sweeping floral arch that towered over the entrance, or the soft, cascading violin music that floated in the air like a well-rehearsed lullaby. It was the sharp sting of familiarity, wrapped in silk, dipped in champagne, and laced with exclusion. Everything smelled like old money and curated legacy. White roses lined every corridor, and the marble floors reflected 1,000 flickers of light from the chandelier above, like the ghosts of a family I was never fully part of. Guests in tailored suits and designer gowns moved through the space like they belonged here. And maybe they did. Because belonging, I had learned, was not a matter of blood. It was about politics. Positioning. Proximity. And I was none of those things. Still, I walked in, wearing the navy gown I had second-guessed 17 times. Not black, too dramatic. Not pastel, too forgettable. Navy. Clean. Cold. Like armor. My heels clicked across the floor as I passed the welcome table, where a young woman with a clipboard and a headset chirped out greetings to arriving guests. She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. Name? She asked, already scanning her list. Iris Moreau, I said. Calm. Controlled. Her fingers paused, her lips tightening just enough for me to notice. Oh, she said, and I knew that oh. It was the sound people made when they saw your name and didn't expect it to be there. Or worse, wished it weren't. Right. Of course. She handed me a place card, the kind with gilded lettering and calligraphy that tried too hard. You're seated at table 19. She didn't need to tell me where that was. I saw the map behind her. Tables 1 through 6 were arranged in a semicircle around the stage where Lilith and her fiancé would sit, flanked by family and best friends. Tables 7 through 14 were for extended relatives, close friends, people who mattered enough to warrant being in photos. The rest of the tables curved off toward the outer edges of the ballroom, near the service doors, the emergency exits, the coat racks. Table 19 wasn't even in the room. It was placed just outside the main doors, tucked beneath a decorative alcove that faced a mirror instead of the celebration. My name wasn't on the chart inside. It was on the edge of an afterthought. Is there a mistake? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She blinked. No, Ms. Moreau. That's your assigned seat. My chest tightened, not from surprise, but from the dull ache of expectation being confirmed. The ache of being reminded yet again, where I stood in this family's hierarchy, present, but peripheral. Visible, but unwanted. I took the card and walked in. The ballroom was a masterpiece. Giant ivory drapes fell like waterfalls from the ceiling. Each table was decorated with candles, fine china, name tags and soft cursive. At the center of it all was Lilith, shimmering in silver, surrounded by attention, laughing with practiced ease. Her fiancé stood beside her, one arm on her back, the other holding a glass of champagne. He looked proud. Dazzled. Like a man who thought he'd won something precious. I scanned the room for my father. He stood near the stage, talking to one of the investors he'd been schmoozing since I was 12. His posture was straight, his smile polite. When his gaze brushed past mine, he didn't flinch. Didn't nod. Didn't offer even the tiniest of acknowledgments. I moved past the crowd, weaving through the glittering bodies of people who knew my name but never said it aloud. I reached the far corner, where Selina, the orchestrator of all this, stood like a queen behind her empire. She wore a black gown that clung to her body like oil to water. Elegant. Precise. Dangerous. She saw me coming. Smiled. The kind of smile that could sell poison as perfume. "Iris," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You made it." "Of course I did," I said. She tilted her head. "Everything's perfect, isn't it? The flowers, the music." "Lilith." "Except the seating," I said. Her smile didn't falter. "Oh, darling. We had so many guests. Logistics, you know. I'm sure it's not personal." But it was. Everything with Selina was personal. Lilith floated over at that moment, the center of her own galaxy. She greeted me with the same performative warmth she reserved for the press. "Look at you," she said. "So polished." "You look expensive," I replied. She laughed. "You're so funny." I wasn't joking. She leaned in, brushing a non-existent strand of hair from her face. "Hope you're not upset about the seat thing. You know how chaotic planning is. And you've always been flexible." "Flexible," I echoed. "Adaptable," she added, eyes gleaming. "You've always been good at fading into the background." There it was. The little slice of truth wrapped in fake affection. I didn't respond. Lilith leaned back, triumphant in her own mind. She turned to greet another guest, her veil of charm fluttering as she moved. I stood there a moment longer, then walked toward the hallway outside, the place they had relegated me to. Table 19 sat near a coat rack, half shielded by a potted plant. My name card stood there, pristine, untouched. I stared at it. Picked it up. Turned it over. Set it back down. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was cold. Sharp. Focused. Because this wasn't about a chair. This was about legacy. Lilith wasn't just getting married. She was being positioned as the new face of the family. The new figurehead. The heir. And I, firstborn, daughter of the original wife, named in old trust documents and forgotten inheritance claims, had been systematically scrubbed from the narrative. But only if I let them. I looked up. The hallway was empty, but the ballroom pulsed behind me like a living thing. And then I heard it. Voices. Whispering. I moved closer, pressing myself against the wall, ears straining. The voices belonged to Lilith and someone I didn't recognize, a man, older, calm. "Everything's in place?" he asked. "Yes," Lilith said. "The documents are signed. Once the transfer is announced, the assets move automatically. The wedding triggers the clause." "And Iris?" A pause. "She won't interfere. She doesn't even know the clause exists. She's not part of the new structure." "You're sure?" Lilith laughed. "She's sitting outside the ballroom, Charles. She's already gone." My breath hitched. The clause. The assets. The transfer. This wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a power shift. A financial one. And I was not only excluded, I was being erased entirely. I stepped back, careful not to make a sound. My pulse thundered in my ears. My fingers tightened around the edge of my dress. Selina's smile. Lilith's condescension. My father's silence. They all knew. And they thought I'd go quietly. I turned away, walking slowly back down the corridor, past the coat rack, past my name card, past the flowers that tried too hard to smell like innocence. They thought they'd written me out of the story. They forgot one thing. I write the endings now. The house was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just outgrown it in every way that mattered. It stood there like a relic frozen in time, peeling paint on the porch, a cracked window in the kitchen that had never been fixed, ivy climbing up the side like nature trying to reclaim what we'd once called home. I hadn't been back since the funeral. Not because I couldn't. Because I wouldn't. It was the house my mother had lived in until the day she died. The house I grew up in before everything was stolen, first by neglect, then by Selina, and finally by silence. My father had never sold it, which always puzzled me. Maybe guilt makes you sentimental. Or maybe it was easier to leave it to rot than to face what it represented. I let myself in with the old key I still carried on my ring. The air was stale, thick with dust and the scent of forgotten things. Sunlight filtered through the blinds in broken stripes, casting the living room in a muted gray. It was like walking into a memory that didn't want to be remembered. Everything was still there. The bookshelf lined with faded paperbacks. The old armchair with the frayed cushion where my mother used to sit and read the newspaper with a cup of mint tea. The framed photographs, untouched, my mother holding me as a baby, her smile wide and real, unlike the polished masks that came later. I walked through the house slowly, like I was visiting someone else's life. Each room whispered something. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator still plugged in, the light crackle of dust shifting under my breath. It was eerie, like time had held its breath the moment she died. I stopped in my old bedroom. The walls were still pale lavender, the color she chose when I was 9, and wanted everything to feel like a fairy tale. My bookshelf was mostly empty now, except for a few worn copies of classic novels and a snow globe I used to collect. I trailed my fingers over the desk, the drawers long since emptied. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for answers. Somewhere in this house, I believed, was a piece of my mother that hadn't been buried yet. Something she left behind, not just furniture or photographs, but the truth. And I needed it now more than ever. I started with her bedroom. It was still made up neatly, as if she'd return at any moment. The bedspread pulled tight, the pillows fluffed. Her vanity sat untouched, covered in a fine layer of dust. Perfume bottles, hairbrushes, a small box of earrings. I opened the drawers one by one. Old receipts, hand cream, letters from friends. Nothing important. But then I noticed something strange, a panel beneath the bottom drawer, slightly warped, like it had been removed before and hastily put back. I pulled it out. Behind it, tucked inside the hollow frame of the vanity, was a leather-bound notebook. Thick, worn, the edges frayed from age and use. My heart kicked against my ribs as I pulled it free and brushed off the dust. It was hers. I didn't even have to open it to know. Her handwriting had always been distinct, elegant but hurried, full of emotion. I flipped it open to the first page. April 12th. Iris asked me today if she'll still be my favorite when the new baby comes. I told her yes. I meant it. But I'm scared. Scared of how things are changing. How he's changing. My throat tightened. I kept reading. Page after page, she chronicled everything. Her fears, her doubts, her loneliness. She wrote about the early days, how my father started coming home late, how he spoke Selena's name before she even knew there was an affair. How she tried to confront him but was met with gaslighting and deflection. He says I'm imagining things. That Selena is just a consultant. But I see the way he looks at her. I see the way she watches him like she's already won. I turned the page. More entries. Some mundane, dinner recipes, Iris's school events, but always tinged with the undercurrent of sadness. Then came a paragraph that stopped me cold. I asked him tonight what would happen to Iris if something ever happened to me. He told me not to worry. He said Selena would take care of everything. And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. But now I'm not so sure. I saw Selena's face today when she looked at Iris. It wasn't maternal. It was strategic. Strategic. That word echoed in my head. I kept reading, flipping faster now, as the entries grew darker. She's manipulating him. I see it clearly now. He doesn't think for himself anymore. Every financial decision, every household change, it goes through her. She's consolidating. And I don't know where I fit into this anymore. The last few pages were stained, the ink smudged like tears had fallen on them. I'm writing a new will. I haven't told him yet. I'm leaving everything to Iris. Everything that was mine. I need to protect her. I know they'll try to erase me once I'm gone. But she'll have this. She'll have the truth. I closed the book, my hands trembling. There it was. Proof. Proof that my mother saw it coming. That she tried to fight it. That she tried to protect me. And it was all hidden here, in a vanity drawer, while the rest of the world had moved on without her. I stared at the diary for a long time. It felt like holding her heart. Like hearing her voice after all these years. And in that moment I didn't cry. I burned. I took the diary and walked out of the bedroom, the house suddenly feeling smaller, heavier, like it was pressing against my chest. I stepped onto the porch, the evening air sharp against my skin. There was only one person I could trust with this. Aunt Claire. She had disappeared after the funeral, quietly withdrawing from the family like a thread pulled from a tapestry. No explanations, no drama. Just silence. I had always assumed she left out of grief. But maybe it was something else. I drove 3 hours at night to reach her cottage by the lake. She hadn't changed much, still sharp-eyed, still blunt, still surrounded by books and boxes and an air of cautious wisdom. When she opened the door and saw me holding the diary, she didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside and let me in. We sat at her kitchen table. I laid out the journal, the photographs, a copy of the guest list from the engagement party. I told her everything. About the video. The seat. The overheard conversation. The clause. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. I knew Selena was dangerous, she said. But I didn't think she'd be this bold. She's counting on silence, I said. On my silence. Claire nodded, her eyes on the diary. And you're done being silent. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She got up, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a file folder. Your mother gave me a copy, she said, of the original will. She made me promise to keep it safe in case anything happened to her. I never imagined it would come to this. She laid the folder in front of me. I opened it. There it was. Her signature. My name. The full rights to everything she owned, her shares in the family business, the house, her personal accounts. All of it. None of it had ever been honored. Because the will that was read after her death wasn't this one. It was Selena's version. I looked up. Can we challenge it? Claire's lips curled into something close to a smile. We can do a hell of a lot more than that. She pulled out her laptop and began typing, fingers moving fast and practiced. We'll need dates, documentation, anything that can prove intent and manipulation. And we'll need to move before the wedding. Why? Because once Lilith is legally married and the transfer happens, it's harder to freeze the assets. Right now, everything is still technically in limbo. We use that. I nodded, the pieces forming in my head. The wedding was in 9 days. 9 days to build a case, gather evidence, and prepare to expose an empire built on lies. I'll need help, I said. I'll call in a few favors, Claire replied. Old colleagues. People who hate Selena as much as we do. I stared at the folder, the diary, the quiet strength of a woman who had been erased and still found a way to be heard. My mother may not have been able to stop them. But I could. And I would. No more sidelines. No more silence. It was time to take my name back. The thing about lies is that they rarely fall apart on their own. They are built like walls, brick by brick, reinforced with years of habit, with silence, with the complicity of those too afraid to question what's just familiar enough to feel like truth. Selena's lie was no different. But now, with the original will in my hands and the weight of my mother's voice behind me, that wall had its first crack. And we were going to take it down, not with hammers, but with paper, proof, and precision. Claire was tireless. From the moment she retrieved that folder, she transformed. Her grief-hardened reserve gave way to the cool fire of a woman who had waited too long to be useful. Her cottage became command central, papers pinned to walls, timelines sprawled across tables, highlighters bleeding color into dry legal print. You need to understand something, she told me on the second night, standing over a spread of documents and case files. Selena's genius wasn't in forging the will. It was in making sure the original one was never seen. I leaned over the table. But isn't a forged will illegal by default? She nodded. Absolutely. But forged doesn't mean fake. She didn't create a completely new document. She manipulated an older draft, one your mother signed under pressure, and made it seem like the final version. She excluded the trust language. She scrubbed the inheritance clauses. Then, once your mother passed, she filed it quietly while your father grieved and no one questioned anything. And because no one expected a fight, I said, she got away with it. Exactly. We began the process of assembling our counterattack. Claire contacted a former probate attorney she'd worked with years ago, someone who had retired but owed her a favor. He agreed to look over the documentation and help prepare an injunction, should we need to file something quickly. The most urgent issue was time. Selena had scheduled the final legal transfer of my mother's assets for the day of Lilith's wedding. It wasn't just symbolic. It was tactical. Once the marriage was official, Lilith would be legally bound to the family, and under the terms of the manipulated will, eligible for inheritance under the continuity of estate clause, a clause that wouldn't apply if the original will were restored. Claire explained it to me like this. Your mother wanted everything to pass directly to you. But the will Selena filed created a trust structure that gives her control, with Lilith as the designated beneficiary once she's formally integrated into the family. That's lawyer speak for married in. I swallowed. So if the wedding happens and the transfer goes through, it's over? Not entirely. But it gets messier. Harder to untangle. Public perception would shift. Legal recourse becomes reputation dependent. In other words, the window was closing. We had 8 days. 8 days to verify the handwriting analysis, authenticate the original will, trace the timeline of manipulation, and prepare for the moment that would bring everything to a head. We didn't want to quietly reverse the damage. We wanted the exposure to be public, calculated, undeniable, irreversible. But to do that, we needed leverage. We needed people. The first name Claire mentioned was Harold Carr, Selena's ex-husband. The man she had nearly bankrupted in a private equity shell game 20 years ago, then settled out of court before any formal charges were filed. Back then, she was just an ambitious socialite playing with dangerous tools. Now she had a fortune to protect and an empire built on that very silence. Claire reached out. Harold responded within minutes. He remembered everything. He agreed to meet. We drove to a private club 2 towns over. Harold was in his 60s now, trim, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen ruin and rebuilt it. He looked at me like he already knew what I was about to ask. "She's doing it again, isn't she?" he said, barely waiting for pleasantries. "She never stopped," Claire answered. He exhaled, nodded once, then slid a folder across the table. "Everything I didn't say in court. Copies of communications. Bank transfers. Notes she left behind. I kept it all. Not for revenge. Just in case someone else needed it." I flipped through the folder. Selena's name. Her signature. Financial documents from years ago. Statements that mirrored the tactics she had used in our family: create a dependency, then build a structure where no one questions her authority until it's too late. "We're going to expose her," I said. Harold looked at me carefully. "Do it clean. Don't play her game. She always bets on chaos." "I'm not here for chaos," I replied. "I'm here for clarity." We left with the documents. One more weapon in our growing arsenal. Claire started contacting journalists, quietly, discreetly. She reached out to an editor at a major publication who had covered my mother's philanthropic work years ago. The editor agreed to run a story, but only if we could verify the claims. That verification came in the form of a forensic analyst, an expert in document authentication, who examined the diary, the original will, and Selena's version side by side. His report came back after 3 agonizing days. "The will filed after your mother's death contains inconsistencies in ink type, line pressure, and document aging. The signature appears to have been lifted from an earlier document and digitally replicated. It's not an outright forgery, but it is manipulated." We had our proof. We had motive. We had witnesses. Now we needed a plan. We decided that the reveal had to happen at the wedding. Public. Devastating. Surgical. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because humiliation was the only language Selena understood. The only thing that could shatter her narrative and prevent her from controlling the fallout. She had curated this event like a coronation, Lilith ascending, the legacy transferring, the entire family bowing to her orchestration. I was going to interrupt the performance. Claire helped me compile a dossier, a clean, well-documented set of evidence. The will. The diary. The analyst's report. Harold's testimony. A timeline of events, financial statements, notarized letters. It was clinical. Professional. Unemotional. But I wasn't. As I looked at the folder, at the names and signatures and the thread of lies that ran through it all, I felt something unfamiliar. Not rage. Not sadness. Something colder. Resolve. Then Claire handed me a flash drive. "You'll need this too." "What's on it?" "Your mother." Her voice. I stared at her. She recorded an audio journal. Just a few entries. "I didn't want to tell you before, but she talks about you. About what she was afraid of. What she hoped for. She knew something like this could happen." I took the drive in both hands, holding it like it might burn me. "Iris," Claire said softly, "your mother didn't just leave you things. She left you power. Use it." I listened to the audio that night, alone in the guest room. Her voice was lower than I remembered. Worn at the edges. But still unmistakable. "If you're hearing this, it means I wasn't strong enough to stop what's coming. I tried. God knows I tried. But if there's any part of me still alive in this world, it's you, Iris. You are not invisible. You are not weak. You are my legacy. And you don't need their permission to claim what's yours." I closed my eyes. Let the words settle like stones in my chest. I slept for the first time in days. In the morning I called Claire. "Let's invite them all," I said. "The witnesses?" "No. The ghosts. The ones Selena left in her wake. The people she used and discarded. Let them see what she becomes when the lights hit her from the wrong angle." Claire made the calls. Invitations sent. Rooms booked. Everything arranged. The stage was set. 5 days until the wedding. Selena sent me a message that night. Short. Cold. I hope you've found peace with your position in this family. There's still time to choose grace. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote a reply I never sent. You stole a legacy and built an empire on ashes. But ashes remember. And this time, the fire belongs to me. I saved it. Not for her. For myself. A reminder of what it means to rise without screaming. To reclaim without begging. To end something without becoming it. The will that never was would finally be seen. And with it, everything would begin again. The morning of the wedding was eerily calm. Outside the grand estate, the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, the kind of weather you'd expect on a postcard, not the day a family empire prepared to unravel. Inside, the house buzzed like a hive, stylists rushing through corridors, florists adjusting centerpieces, coordinators speaking in hushed but urgent tones into wireless headsets. The chandeliers were polished to a mirror shine. The air was saturated with roses, money, and the scent of curated illusion. And Lilith was the star. She floated down the staircase like a queen stepping onto the balcony for her coronation, her gown shimmering with hand-beaded crystals, her hair a cascade of perfectly placed waves. Every eye followed her. Every smile bent around her orbit. She soaked in the adoration like a woman who'd spent her life learning how to make people fall in line. I stood at the edge of the room, silent. I hadn't spoken to her since the engagement party. Since the whisper behind the wall. Since I discovered exactly what she was about to steal, and exactly how far Selena was willing to go to help her do it. I had worn silence like a second skin for years, but this time, it wasn't submission. It was strategy. Lilith caught my eye. Her smile didn't falter, but her gaze lingered for just a second too long. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. Not yet. I made my way through the maze of tables and place settings until I reached the main ballroom. It was a cathedral of excess. Rose arrangements taller than children lined the aisle. Gold trim on every surface. Glass orbs floating in water on each table, candles flickering inside like captured stars. Every detail was engineered to signal perfection. Guests were arriving in waves, press, investors, extended family, a scattering of minor celebrities invited to amplify the image. At the far end of the room, Selena stood near the altar, overseeing final adjustments with her signature smile, part diplomat, part weapon. Her eyes scanned the room constantly, calculating. She saw me. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. But the tightness around her mouth told me everything I needed to know. She was nervous. Good. Claire arrived 15 minutes later with Harold Carr and a small cluster of discreet allies, people who had once stood too close to Selena and now bore the scars of it. They didn't wear signs. They didn't need to. They carried the truth in their eyes, and that was enough. The plan was simple. There would be no confrontation. No yelling. No chaos. Only clarity. During the reception, after the vows had been exchanged but before the asset transfer was announced, there would be a tribute video. A montage curated by Selena and Lilith's team, showcasing their love story, their family legacy, their future. We had made a small edit. Not a replacement. An insertion. Just enough. I sat at my assigned table, this time inside the ballroom, though still not close enough to suggest inclusion. It didn't matter. Proximity was irrelevant when you controlled the current. The ceremony began. The music swelled. Lilith entered the room to a crescendo of violins and flashbulbs. Gasps swept the crowd. She was stunning, I'll give her that. Her dress shimmered like a promise. Her smile could have melted steel. She walked down the aisle like a woman who believed in her own legend. Dominic waited at the altar, handsome in a navy tuxedo, his expression unreadable. He had always seemed just a step behind her, a man dazzled by beauty, unaware of the game behind the curtain. But today, I wondered. The vows were delivered with precision. Each word tailored, tested, approved. And then, I do! Applause. A kiss. And just like that, Lilith Morrow became Lilith Carr. The room erupted into celebration. Glasses clinked. Music swelled again. Guests moved to the reception area, laughing, buzzing, oblivious to the undercurrent building beneath their feet. It began with a toast. Selena took the stage, beaming. Her voice rang clear through the microphone. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the union of two extraordinary people. Lilith, my beautiful daughter, has always been destined for greatness. And Dominic, you've brought her peace, strength, and a new chapter. Today, we celebrate love. And tomorrow, we build a legacy. Polite applause. She continued. To honor this new beginning, we have a gift. A transition of trust, of history, and of vision. Effective immediately, we will be transferring the Morrow family estate into joint ownership under Mr. and Mrs. Carr. It is not just a wedding gift. It is a gesture of faith. Of continuity. Gasps of delight. Cameras flashed. And then the screen behind her came to life. At first, it looked like part of the planned montage, photographs of Lilith and Dominic, childhood memories, family portraits. But then the colors shifted. The screen went dark. A single audio recording played over a black background. If you're hearing this, it means I wasn't strong enough to stop what's coming. My mother's voice. Unedited. Unapologetic. The room stilled. I watched Selena's posture freeze, her smile flicker for the first time in years. Lilith's brow furrowed. Then the images appeared. Side-by-side comparisons of the original will and the version Selena had submitted to the court. Forensic annotations. Analyst notes. Signature overlays. A slow, devastating unraveling of the lie. Next came the financial documents. Timelines. Transfer records. And finally, the footage. Selena, recorded years ago, speaking to her former lawyer. It's simple. We bypassed the original. I have a draft she signed under pressure. We filed that one. Iris won't contest it. She's too polite. The room didn't gasp this time. It exhaled, collectively, as if realizing something they had always suspected but never dared to say. When the screen went dark again, there was no applause. Only silence. Claire stepped onto the stage, calm, collected. She spoke briefly. My name is Claire Moreau. I am the legal executor of Annalise Moreau's estate. What you've just seen are verified documents, authenticated by experts. The original will left everything to Iris Moreau, her only biological child. That will was never honored. She stepped aside. And I walked forward. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. I stood there, in a room that had once swallowed me whole, and I let the truth hang in the air like a judgment. I looked at my father. He couldn't meet my eyes. I looked at Dominic. He looked at Lilith. And then, slowly, he stepped away from her. Selena tried to recover. This is clearly a misunderstanding, she said, voice sharp, too controlled. An act of desperation. We have legal. Harold Carr stepped out of the crowd. Selena, he said, voice calm. You forged a will. She turned pale. I have proof, he said. And I'm not the only one. More guests came forward. Quiet. Methodical. Each one carried a story, a receipt, a fragment of the empire she had built on this direction. Selena stood motionless. Lilith? She broke. No, she said, stepping toward me. This is your fault. I didn't move. She pointed at me, her voice rising. You always hated me. You couldn't stand that they loved me more. This isn't about the will. This is about you being petty. Jealous. Small. I tilted my head. Is that what you tell yourself? She lunged. But Dominic stepped between us. Stop, he said. She froze. He turned to me. Is it true? I met his gaze. Yes. He nodded. Then turned to Lilith. I asked you if Iris would be part of the estate, he said. You said she didn't want it. She didn't, Lilith said. She never fought for it. I'm fighting now, I said. And then, like a thread snapping, Lilith collapsed into tears, not graceful, not performative. Raw, ugly sobs that cracked the surface of her perfect mask. She turned to our father. Dad? But he didn't move. He didn't speak. Selena reached for her composure, but it was gone. The room no longer belonged to her. I stepped down from the stage. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't need a toast. I had the truth. And it was enough. The aftermath didn't hit like an explosion. It wasn't immediate, chaotic, or loud. No one screamed. No glass shattered. No one stormed out. The collapse happened the way families fall apart when they've spent years pretending nothing's wrong, slowly, methodically, and irreversibly. After the video played and Claire laid out the truth, the ballroom never quite recovered. The energy shifted, first to confusion, then discomfort, then something colder. People no longer looked at Lilith and Selena with admiration. They looked at them with calculation, suspicion, and worst of all, curiosity. The guests didn't flee. They lingered. Waiting. Hungry for the next twist. Lilith vanished moments after Dominic stepped away from her. Selena tried to follow, but Harold Carr intercepted her with a calmness that said, not this time. He spoke low and firm, and whatever he said turned Selena's face into marble. She didn't speak again that night. Claire gave one final statement to the press, short and surgical. The estate transfer is under injunction. All legal rights to the Moreau inheritance are being reviewed under the original will. I stood by the far column, still in the same navy dress I wore when I arrived, still untouched by the celebration that never truly welcomed me. Except now, they all saw me. Not as the forgotten daughter. Not as the shadow on the wall. but as the woman who had just brought the ceiling down. I walked out before the DJ resumed, before the staff began clearing tables, before the guests decided which version of the story they would believe. I didn't need to hear their whispers. I had heard them my whole life. Now they would whisper about someone else. Back at Claire's, we said nothing for a long time. She poured us each a glass of red wine and sat across from me in the kitchen, barefoot, finally letting herself rest. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "We did." Claire gave a tired smile, but her eyes remained sharp. "This isn't the end. Selina will fight. She already lost," I said. "She just doesn't know how to lose quietly." Claire didn't argue. Over the next 48 hours, the headlines did what they always do, reduced a decade of silence and sabotage into a punchy headline. Heiress reclaims inheritance in shocking wedding day reveal. Fake will, real motive, socialite under fire. From invisible to inevitable, Iris Morrow steps into spotlight. I ignored all of it. What mattered was the silence that followed, the kind that settles in when people who once dictated the narrative no longer have control of the microphone. Lilith didn't return home. Selina didn't answer calls from the board of trustees. My father called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was different. Not stern, not cold. Just tired. "Iris, I suppose I owe you more than an apology. I don't know what to say. I let things happen. Things I shouldn't have. I didn't protect you. I didn't protect your mother's memory. If there's any way I can make this right, please let me." I deleted the voicemail. He didn't get to make it right with words. Not anymore. 2 days later, he showed up at Claire's. He didn't come in. He stood at the edge of the front garden like he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross. I watched him through the window for a long time before I finally stepped out onto the porch. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. His shoulders slumped. His suit wrinkled. The facade was slipping. "Iris," he said. Just that. I didn't respond. "I know I can't undo what happened," he continued. "But I'd like to understand." "You stood beside her," I said. "You watched her erase your wife's name from her own legacy. You let her twist me into a footnote. And you said nothing." "I was afraid," he said. "I was a child," I said. "And I still fought harder than you did." He winced. "You're right." I waited. "I let Selina rewrite everything because it was easier than admitting I'd failed. And I kept letting her because I thought, if I pretended long enough, it would become true. And what do you think now? That truth has a way of clawing its way back." Silence stretched between us. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. I want to know you again. If you'll let me." I looked at him, the man who had once lifted me onto his shoulders at a fair, who had once braided my hair clumsily after my mother died, who had slowly vanished into silence. A part of me wanted to reach for that version. But he was gone. "I don't know if I have room for you in my life anymore," I said, my voice even. His eyes glistened. "I understand." And then, for the first time in years, he turned away. Not with anger. Not with pride. Just quietly. Like someone finally realizing what it meant to be shut out of a life he once assumed would always have space for him. The following week was a legal blur. Claire filed the official claim to reassert the original will. With Harold's documents, the forensic analysis, and Selina's own voice on tape, the judge issued a preliminary injunction within 3 days. The estate was frozen. The board removed Selina as acting trustee. I was instated as interim manager until the full hearing. It felt surreal. The same people who had ignored me, belittled me, or failed to remember my name now emailed me daily. They addressed me as Ms. Morrow. They asked for input. They waited for my decisions. But power didn't thrill me. What thrilled me was the silence on Selina's end. Not a word. No public statement. No press release. No legal challenge, yet. She was waiting. Planning. Claire was cautious. "She'll counter. She always does." "I know," I said. "But next time, she'll be playing defense." And Lilith? She was quiet too. No social media. No public appearances. Dominic issued a short statement. "Due to recent developments, we are reevaluating our legal and personal commitments." He didn't mention her name. I received a letter from Lilith 2 days after the estate freeze. It was handwritten. Pages long. A mix of denial, rage, and desperate justification. "You were always jealous of me. I didn't know about the forged will. Selina only did what she thought was right. You humiliated me on my wedding day. I hope it was worth it." I didn't finish reading it. Because none of it mattered. Not anymore. The family I thought I belonged to, The one I had fought to be part of, to earn love from, was a fiction. Built on appearances. Maintained by fear. Held together by the silence of people too afraid to name the rot underneath the gold leaf. It had taken years, but now the truth was out. This wasn't my family. Not really. Families protect. Families remember. Families don't erase. Claire and I spent the next 2 weeks untangling the legal mess. Every document we uncovered was another thread in a web of manipulation, hidden trusts, silent transfers, loopholes exploited with surgical precision. Selina had been preparing her exit for years. She just didn't think I'd be the one waiting at the door. I sat in the boardroom of Morrow Holdings on a Tuesday morning, flanked by attorneys and auditors, and I signed the documents that officially named me the successor trustee. The room applauded. Claire squeezed my hand. It should have felt triumphant. But it didn't. It felt like a funeral for a version of myself I had outgrown. That night, back at Claire's, I stood outside on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars. "I don't feel victorious," I said. Claire joined me, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "Because you didn't win. You reclaimed. Is there a difference?" She sipped her tea. "Winning is about beating someone else. Reclaiming is about remembering who you were before they convinced you were nothing." I let that sit. And then I said, "They never loved me." Claire didn't argue. Instead, she said, "But you love you." It wasn't a statement. It was a question. And I didn't answer. Not yet. Because healing doesn't happen in the courtroom. It happens in the quiet, after the war is over. It took 1 year. 1 full orbit around the sun for the dust to settle, for the press to move on, for the silence to finally feel like peace instead of punishment. 1 year since the wedding that never became a marriage. Since the room full of applause turned into a courtroom full of audits. Since I stopped being the afterthought. And in that year, everything changed. Selina was removed from every board she ever sat on. The charges didn't come all at once. They came like slow, steady rain: civil fraud, will manipulation, misappropriation of charitable funds, unethical influence over a trust. She pled not guilty, of course. She always believed in optics over outcome. But this wasn't a courtroom she controlled. The verdict is still pending. The public, however, made its decision long ago. Her name vanished from foundations, awards, press events. People stopped returning her calls. Investors cut ties. Socialites distanced themselves like she was radioactive. She went from matriarch to pariah in less than 3 months. And Lilith? She disappeared. After Dominic filed for annulment, citing fraud, she released one last statement through a publicist. "I was misled. I was manipulated. I am focusing on healing." The classic deflection. The darling spin. But the public wasn't buying it anymore. Her Instagram went silent. Her name faded from charity galas and brand deals. Rumors circulated. She left the country, she changed her name, she's living in a wellness retreat somewhere in northern Italy. I never bothered to confirm. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I stopped checking. I stopped needing to know. I stopped waiting to see if she'd rise again, or if she'd ever look back at the space where I used to stand. Because I had finally learned, looking back isn't always about memory. Sometimes, it's a form of surrender. And I was done surrendering. After the estate was settled, after every document was signed and the trust officially restored to my name, I sold most of it. The holdings, the stocks, the vacation properties. I liquidated the parts of the legacy that weren't mine. The ones built during the Selina years. The ones soaked in quiet cruelty. And then I bought back the house. Not the one Selina lived in. Not the penthouse in the city. The old house. My mother's house. The one with the peeling porch and the creaky floorboards and the kitchen window that never closed quite right. I didn't restore it. I repurposed it. It became the Eden House. A center for women who had been erased, by family, by partners, by systems too polite to call abuse what it was. Claire helped set up the nonprofit. She serves as legal counsel. We offer housing, legal support, career guidance. Not charity. Not sympathy. Structure. Respect. A reset. I live in the apartment above the center. It's not grand. Not glamorous. It's home. There's a small balcony with a view of the lake. In the mornings, I sit with a cup of coffee and a worn paperback, listening to the city breathe. Sometimes I hear laughter from below, women starting over, children learning stability, someone's playlist drifting up from an open window. That sound is better than applause. And then one morning, an email arrived. Subject line: request for interview, the woman who rewrote her family. A journalist from a major magazine. She wanted to profile me. To tell the real story. She called it inspirational. I stared at the screen for a long time. And then I closed the laptop. Because the truth is, I'm not the story. The story is every girl who sat behind the pillar, who got cropped out of the photo, who stayed quiet at the dinner table while her world shifted without her. Every woman who tried to earn her place with silence, who thought that maybe if she just smiled enough, stayed out of the way enough, sacrificed enough, someone would see her. The story is not how I was erased. It's how I learned to stop begging to be included. My mother once told me, legacies aren't inherited. They're created. I never understood what she meant until I saw mine unraveling in front of me. Until I realized I didn't want what they were building. I wanted to start over. To build something I could be proud of. Something that didn't require anyone else to shrink so I could stand tall. I kept the diary. Her voice is still in my desk drawer, soft and steady, reminding me where I came from. Sometimes, when the nights are quiet and the city fades into shadows, I read it again. Not because I need the pain, but because I need the reminder. I survived. And more than that, I mattered. Even when they tried to convince me I didn't. There's a photo on the bookshelf now. Not the old family photo, not the staged holidays or curated memories. Just me, Claire, and the first 3 residents of Eden House, laughing over takeout containers and a bottle of wine that cost too much. The frame is crooked. The lighting is bad. No one's makeup is perfect. But I've never looked more like myself. This is the legacy I want. Not revenge. Not victory. Freedom. I receive a letter from my father, months after the final hearing. Handwritten. No apology this time. Just a line. I see you now. I just wish I had seen you then. I don't reply. But I fold the letter and place it in the back of my mother's diary. Not to forgive. Not to forget. To mark the point where the silence finally broke. I don't walk through the city with a chip on my shoulder anymore. I don't flinch when I hear Lilith's name in passing. I don't brace myself for the next betrayal. I breathe. I create. I choose. The family I was born into no longer defines me. The family I built, the women I stand beside, the voices I've helped amplify, the people who walk through the doors of Eden House every day, is the one I carry forward. So if you're reading this, and you've ever felt like the extra, the forgotten, the one shoved to the edge of the frame, know this. You don't have to fight for a seat at their table. You can build your own. And when you do, make it long, make it wide, and make sure no one ever feels invisible again. That's how you rewrite a legacy. That's how you choose yourself. And choosing yourself? It's not selfish. It's survival. Life doesn't always shatter with thunder. Sometimes it unravels in silence, in the space between family smiles, in the seats we're not given, in the memories edited to exclude us. The story of Iris Morrow is not a tale of revenge. It is a study of reclamation. A journey from erasure to remembrance. From being made invisible to becoming undeniable. And beneath all the courtroom victories and public unveilings, her story offers us something rare and necessary, a mirror reflecting what it means to truly choose yourself. It teaches us what self-worth looks like when no one else is offering it. And perhaps most painfully, it reminds us that some families are built not on love, but performance, and that letting go of those performances is the only path to freedom. From the beginning, Iris was conditioned to believe that her presence was a disruption. She wasn't exiled with violence, she was erased with elegance. Cropped out of videos. Seated behind pillars. Forgotten on purpose. And that kind of exclusion is often more damaging than overt cruelty because it gaslights us into thinking we imagine the pain. We start asking, did I really matter less? Or am I just too sensitive? Iris lived in that liminal space for years, performing obedience while quietly carrying the weight of her own dismissal. The story reminds us that the deepest wounds are often not those inflicted by strangers or enemies, but by the very people who claim to love us. What makes Iris's journey so compelling is not just her courage to confront the truth, but the way she did it, with restraint, with clarity, and with integrity. She did not seek to burn the house down out of rage. She sought to rebuild the house her mother had started, the one grounded in truth and care and legacy that meant something. And in doing so, she demonstrates one of the most difficult and mature forms of power, the ability to act with purpose when you've been given every reason to react with vengeance. This is the first lesson. Choosing yourself doesn't mean proving others wrong. It means honoring what is right. Iris didn't stand up to Selena and Lilith to shame them, though that was a consequence. She did it to restore a narrative that had been violently rewritten without her consent. She didn't reclaim the estate for wealth. She reclaimed it because it was the final thing her mother had given her. A promise, whispered through time, that said, "You are not invisible to me." In a world where many people spend their entire lives waiting for that kind of acknowledgement, Iris teaches us that sometimes the only person who can truly see you is you. The second lesson lies in her silence. Iris is not a character who yells or demands. She isn't loud, even when the room begs her to be. Her power lies in her refusal to perform the emotional labor others expect of her. She does not cry for her father's attention. She does not argue with Lilith when accused of jealousy. She does not try to salvage the fake smiles around her. She simply stops playing the role. And that, in itself, is an act of rebellion. In a society that teaches us, especially women, that being polite, agreeable, and accommodating is the path to belonging, Iris shows us the cost of that illusion. You can give everything, your time, your peace, your voice, and still not be chosen. So eventually, the strongest thing you can do is walk away. But walking away isn't easy. Especially when the people we leave behind are the ones we were taught to orbit. Iris doesn't walk away from strangers. She walks away from her father. From the memory of her mother that was distorted by silence. From a sister who played the role of golden child with perfection. And perhaps most painfully, from the hope that they would one day change. That hope, the belief that maybe, just maybe, they'll see you if you wait long enough, is a kind of grief all on its own. And letting go of that hope is what finally sets her free. Her confrontation with her father is one of the most telling scenes in her journey. He comes not with arrogance, but with regret. And yet, regret is not the same as repair. His apology, genuine as it may be, arrives after years of absence. After Iris has built herself back from the wreckage. And she does not crumble in his presence. She does not soothe his guilt. She tells him the truth, you let this happen. Because the third lesson Iris teaches us is that silence is not neutral. Silence enables harm. Her father's inaction was not a passive mistake. It was a choice. And owning that truth is essential, not for punishment, but for closure. Perhaps one of the most powerful threads in Iris's story is her refusal to become what hurt her. She could have destroyed Selena and Lilith in ways far more brutal. She had the proof, the platform, and the attention. But instead of vengeance, she chose precision. She exposed the truth, then walked away from the spectacle. She did not seek applause. She sought accountability. And in doing so, she showed us that justice doesn't always require noise. Sometimes it just needs to be undeniable. Unignorable. Unapologetically true. After the courtroom victories, after the legal transfer, after the press moved on, she didn't cling to the wealth or power. She let go of everything that wasn't truly hers and returned to the only place that ever felt like home, her mother's house. And in rebuilding it into the Eden house, Iris gives us the final and most enduring lesson of all. Healing is not about returning to who you were before the pain. It's about becoming someone new with the wisdom of having survived it. The Eden house isn't just a shelter. It's a monument to every version of Iris that was overlooked. It's an act of radical visibility for women who have been told, implicitly or explicitly, that they are too much, or not enough. And in naming the center after the very concept of origin and rebirth, Iris shows us that legacy isn't what we inherit. It's what we create. There is something profound about the quietness of her final chapter. She doesn't seek to be known. She declines interviews. She turns away the spotlight. Because for the first time, she doesn't need anyone to validate her worth. She isn't chasing reconciliation. She isn't measuring success by public approval. She's living a life of her own choosing, one not defined by trauma, but by transformation. In a world addicted to resolution, Iris's ending offers something more honest, peace without perfection. Her father's letter doesn't fix everything. Lilith's silence doesn't bring satisfaction. Selena's fall from grace doesn't erase the years of manipulation. And yet, Iris is at peace, not because the world finally gave her justice, but because she stopped waiting for it. This, more than anything, is the heart of her story. Choosing yourself is not about winning. It's not about revenge. It's not even about being right. It's about recognizing that you do not have to earn your place in someone else's narrative. You can write your own. You can step out of the frame and build a new one that honors your truth, your grief, your joy. You can stop editing yourself to fit into a family, a relationship, a world that was never designed to hold you fully. And you can walk forward, not because you've closed the door on the past, but because you've finally chosen to stop knocking. Iris Moreau's story is for anyone who's ever felt like the spare, the extra, the invisible thread holding together a tapestry that would never acknowledge its worth. It's a reminder that visibility starts from within. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to scream your story at the world, but to live it fully, without permission, without apology, without fear. So if you find yourself sitting behind the pillar, wondering if anyone sees you, wondering if anyone will ever save you, let Iris remind you, the person you've been waiting for is already here. You. And the moment you choose yourself, the story begins again. Not the one they wrote for you. The one you were always meant to write.